We are here. Hey, 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 land of Facebook. Laura J, GeorD Lishman here. And we are on the premises where Soulshine Festival took place earlier on Labor Day weekend in September. And so that was exciting. And we're continuing the party on my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. So excited to be here together. And so GeorD said he would join me in doing this book medicine workshop experience. So we've each got a copy of Fully Committed, The Sacred Sojourn of Now. And if you don't, you can reach out and let me know that you would like a copy. I'd like that, very much appreciate it. And it's a shameless self-promotion on my birthday.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for coming on with me.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, brilliant.
If I can contribute in any way, I'm happy to.
Yeah, well, you've got so much to offer. I feel like it's time to just like bring worlds together and to drop walls that used to keep us divided, and then actually make those walls into bridges that unite nations, first within ourselves, of the CELLS, and then of the selves that we see ourselves to be part of within the larger matrix that we're all part of and connected through.
We all must come together.
Yeah, literally. The Beatles were not just bugs crawling on the ground. So I'm going to move this over. Is there anything that you would like, for those who didn't come to Soulshine, actually, I would love for you to share who you are and how fascinating your story is, because you have had a tremendous life and you really have been the artist of your own life.
I am an artist. That's kind of my main gig, but I like to try to incorporate art into all things. So I also do a bit of engineering. I like to make mechanical, kinetic sculptures. I have one touring right now with the Science Center. Actually, I think it's gone to the Science Centers in the States now. About how kind of it's called the emotional baggage machine, and it's all about how our psyche works and how to we have a male and a female brain, and it's just a beautiful machine. But that's what I like to do, and I'm obviously a very big supporter of peaceful inner warriors, because if we're ever going to straighten all this mess out, it's a individual's journey on their own 2 feet in this world, trying to be a better human. It's about that kind of level of people growing that we really need in order actually to come together and make peace and do good things.
Yeah.
So,
well, grateful to be on this journey with you, and Cheryl too. Hey, hey, hey. Awesome to see you here. And what I love is the fact that you have actually created the emotional carburetor. What is it?
Emotional baggage machine, or called the carousels of life, because of a baggage carousel, and it has like a big spinning thing on it. And if you go to my YouTube channel, it should be on there. I think it's GeorD Lishman.
I'll post it. So we'll go to your website.
You go to my website as well. That's GeorDLishman.com. There's some shameless self-promotion for you.
Well, we're both doing that.
Yeah.
But it does actually tie together beautifully, because the high rise of emotional awareness is really where we can actually drop our attachment to the not now moments that have taken us into lower level emotional states of awareness that ultimately make it so that we believe ourselves to be less, to have less, to need more. And then we start to see the insecurities of the inadequacies that we see within ourselves and others too. When we're in emotions instead of states of being present, is what the high rise of emotional awareness kind of touches on. So I feel like it's significant, because we'll do a feature on your art with that one specifically, because it is entirely connected to chapter 21, which is where toxic loads, colors of right, and the high rise of emotional awareness come into play. And basically, within the high rise of emotional awareness, which you'll be able to see, I don't want to block out GeorD, but you have boredom as the top of the downward spiral of emotions. And then you have contentment upwards as the bottom of the positive spiral upwards. So, emotionally, if you think about these two spirals, which come from the emotional guidance system of Abraham, which is the consciousness channeled through Esther Hicks, when you actually tune into the emotional guidance system, you'll find the two counterclockwise spirals. And those represent what I have then attributed to them to be states of being compared to states of emotion. The difference being when we are being, we're being content, we're being hopeful, optimistic, we have positive expectation. Like we are being the belief that we are who we believe ourselves to be, that society is the way that we see it to be, that people are the way that we see them to be. And ultimately, that shapes our sense of identity. So, those would be states of being present, where you actually have the ability to feel the joy that so oftentimes we go on the journey in order to find. And then it's just like, holy crap, it was here the whole time.
It's all within us.
It is all within us. And then when we have more of that within ourselves, then we can actually find that reflected in the outside world in a way that Bruce Lipton would refer to as the honeymoon effect.
I'm not sure about that. What's that?
It's the concept of dysfunctional and functional relationships. So and I do actually reference this in the book as well. So we're just kind of flowing, and it's 8 minutes and we haven't seen anybody in the comments to say you wanted some book medicine. So if you're tuned in and you're wanting some book medicine, where we're just going to flip to a spot in the book and then I'll read that piece for you, because that's maybe all you need from the whole thing. But until then, we're kind of just riffing and drifting with the moment. Bruce Lipton, Cheryl, she's still with us. All right, you're going to be the first one that I do a little pull for there, Cheryl. But Bruce Lipton in the honey, or you could actually you choose the section, and then I'll read it out, and then we can.
So do I just flip to a random page?
Yeah, you do. Well, you do it with where you're called. But first, I want to say about the Bruce Lipton honeymoon effect. Yeah. The concept is functional and dysfunctional relationships. So basically, in a chemical compound, you have two unbalanced chemicals, or what are they on the periodic table?
So you have elements and chemical, which make up a compound, which would be
so elements. So the elements. You have two unbalanced elements. If we had Bruce Lipton's book here, we'd be able to see it properly, because what he talks about is there's, the center point, the nucleus, and then you've got the rings outside of it. But the outer ring is unbalanced.
Oh, okay. So like you're talking about the valences.
Yeah.
And whether it's wanting to whether there's space for another electron, or whether they're balanced and there's not any space for electrons.
Precisely. So basically, if I'm dysfunctional and I have 6 out of 7 on the outer valence, is
valence,
that
valence,
what?
Valence.
Valence? Okay. So if I have 7 or 6 and you have 1, then our dysfunction would actually compensate for one another for a time.
Absolutely.
And then it would be after that honeymoon effect that we would discover that actually what completed the dynamic for a time, because our dysfunction was balanced with equal dysfunction that was covered with the mask, which is all of the ways that we are asked to play less than we are. Then we're taken out of the ability to actually create a reality that will serve us better, because if we become a noble gas partner, we no longer need somebody else's imbalance to complete our imbalance,
Mhm.
because we've done the inner work
Because we're both
to,
noble already.
yeah,
That's the
doing
idea.
our best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always see it like through the lens of the Nikolai was talking about the Enneagram, right?
Yes.
So that we have these automatons. So there's personalities which basically we form in very young ages that are the way that we mine information or mine energy from the world. And these personalities are like automatic responses, and they're great to a degree. If they start to run your life, then you will wind up with problems. So this is what you're saying about not when you're totally within the automaton, that personality that's basically an automatic reaction system. These things are, ancestrally built to keep us going as a species and to help us find our way to make our way in the world. But they can become so consuming that we think that we're them, and then we forget that we're actually a living kind of consciousness that has inhabited this body to have this experience. And so then you get lost in that. But if you can bring it to the light, then you understand, then you can live creatively. You can make decisions as opposed to it's deciding for you, because you have emotional overwhelming need to do things because of that personality that's kind of taken over. So yeah, like you said, to become a creator, you have to get beyond that and to see beyond your, automaton, and to know that you can actually grow into different things and push yourself and walk away from your comforts and get into that real place where you can create.
Yeah. Because and you were talking about like the masculine and feminine sides of the brain, and how one requires the letting go of, whereas the other requires the holding on to.
Yeah. Well, I see that what you're saying. I don't know if I put it in actually those words, but like the brain, not all of it has male and female sides. The lower old parts of the brain don't, but the new parts all do. And the the male and female side are all about your right is your male side and your left is your female side. I think if you're left-handed, there's some differences you have to pay attention to in the German medicine. But yeah, the male brain has anything that has to do with your father or your partners, and the female brain has anything to do with your mother or your children. Now, the interesting difference between a partner and a child, because a partner is, other than your one mother and one father, the rest of the people in your life are segregated into partners or children. And a partner is basically somebody you hold liable for their actions, and a child is somebody you make accommodations for because they're not quite there. So, depending on how you look at it, that's how it's. So the child side is about letting go of your emotional issues with them, and the partner side is about holding on to it and like saying, no, you've got to be this. You've got to stand up to be my partner. You can't just be this.
Right.
So I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's
on.
Yeah. So that's constraint and freedom, which are the functional polarity spectrum of creation that actually allow us to have freedom because we have constraints. But if we don't have a boundary, we don't know when we're violating someone else or ourselves because we haven't gotten clarity on where those bounds are. So it's just like riding the edge. It's just like, where's the edge? Like kids are always testing the edge, because we were hanging out with your nephew and niece today.
Yeah.
And so it's just children are so intuitive in how they just like maneuver and feel out. And it's so fascinating, group dynamics, because we were at a wedding this weekend, a beautiful wedding. And so
congratulations, Chris and Jenna.
Yay! Super exciting. And yeah, stunning wedding, and the experience was just a reflection of what I would imagine it was in the olden days. Like community, tribalism, bringing together of groups that, are now connected through lineage or through relationship.
I mean, we had rented them all of the Airbnbs, and the neighbors had all the Airbnbs, so their parents and all those people were living really closely, like it was a village. So that does make sense why it felt like that. And everybody had their little cart.
Yeah.
Like back in the day, we would have a horse and cart, but
right.
Yeah, they would have a little cart, and they would drive from their little areas in the woods, and they'd meet at the tent they erected for the wedding. And it was very much like back in the olden days in some ways, like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was just a reflection of the fact that the children got together and they were playing games naturally. The men gravitated towards hanging out with the men sometimes.
But we were cooking a big pig, so we all kind of sat around there and made sure it cooked right.
Yeah, of course, right?
With the
Yeah.
dogs.
With the dogs, yeah, that's absolutely. And then like the ladies connected, and then couples connected, and it was so beautiful to observe from a social perspective how natural it is to be in a setting like that where everyone is just in community of common unity, having a great time, compared to our regular lives for most people, which is you've got your home, you've got your work, you've got your car, you've got your gym membership, you've got your preferred grocer, you've got these boxes that you drive from one box to the next. It's just like, it's such a boxed reality in the world of division and separation compared to in community, where we're actually dropping those walls and becoming the bridge. That instead of it being like your house or mine, it's just like, where's it, like, how can we all gather in community?
Yeah, we're not really set up for communities in cities these days. We're strange because like out here, like if neighbors move in, we go see them and talk to them, find out who they are. But in the city, that's generally not the case if you have somebody move in next door. My experience is the kind of old adage is that when you live in the country, you don't ever see your neighbors, but you know them all. But in the city, you see your neighbors and you hear your neighbors, you just don't know them.
Right.
So funny flip, isn't it?
It is. Absolutely.
But that's why I always thought about designing communities in a way where it's forced to actually have interaction. Like you have your parking lot, you have your ring of your community, but you have a parking lot up here. So everybody has to park here and then travel to the community center into where all the houses are and the play area. And so you maybe the old folks home and daycare are in the community center. So every day when you park your car from when you come in from work or get shopping, you'll go through this area where you see the old folks and everybody sees each other, and then all the houses are facing each other. So you're really in each other's business to a degree. Because I think that kind of anonymity that's been kind of more pushed is a weird thing. Whereas, having a bunch of people in your community that you want to be with is better. Like, I guess it makes sense if you're just putting random people all over the place all the time, but these, I guess, fall under intentional communities so that you actually want to be around the people as opposed to whatever else. The other option is not wanting to be around people. But if you're not wanting to be around people, just go live in the woods. That's what I do.
Yeah.
But I guess you can do that in the city too. If you don't want to be around people, you can just live in your apartment, go to work, never see them.
Yeah, which is a really unhealthy way. And Brendan, awesome to see you. Brendan is my friend in Manitoulin that I told you the beaver story about.
Run, beavers, run.
I interfered with the ability to dispose of a nuisance from the perspective of those who were impacted by it. And then there was I who was present and couldn't just be quiet while life was taken. So I made a shout, and then was not. It was not appreciated, and I'm very sorry. And any hunters would hate to bring me. So just know I'm not your hunting invite kind of friend.
You were damned by the hunters?
Well, I was. It might be a sore spot still, and I appreciate Brendan for sticking with me because I've known him since I was like 4 and he was 2. So that's to you, Brendan. Thank you very much. Cheryl, appreciate you for always tuning in and plugging in to our Telegram Peaceful Inner Warriors United Assembly group. So thank you for your contributions, your shares, your engagement there. And then Zarina as well. It's awesome to see you. She was one of the other practitioners in the Healing Forest at Soulshine with the singing bowls, doing services and treatments. And at one point I had an opportunity to sit down and watch a session, and people were having somatic, it's the psychosomatic reactions.
Hmm.
I believe
tones.
is what Amanda Vollmer would have done a presentation on, or at least she did last year at Soulshine. What did you just say though?
From the tones of the singing bowls.
Do the healing. Yeah, there was the healing, but she was also doing some physical touch as well. And so the combination of those made it so that she was just she was working on somebody else, and somebody else down the line was having a lot of release. And that happened, like I did, I had a session with Dr. Mike at Soulshine as well, in the Healing Forest, who was coordinating our section, where I was offering sessions as well, which I didn't ever really know what I was going to offer. It's just like, show up and let's just see where you're at, and whether you need some touch, or you need some toning, or you need some singing, or you just need some talk, you need some silence, like just let's see where you're at, and then we'll start there. And then Sage, she was the other practitioner who was actually using the tent that I was in. So we were swapping on the 2 days where we had 4-hour shifts each day. And it was so fascinating because I did her very first session after I had done mine. And it was just so powerful because she works the same. She just has different tools, which is really why this conversation is so valuable, because you have different tools that I don't have access to.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So it's just like, together we're stronger. Iron sharpens iron, right?
Mm-hmm. Sharing information is the best way to make the situation more knowledgeable.
And then what's your definition of knowledge and wisdom? Because I love your distinction between the two.
Well, I guess Grandpa always used to say, knowledge is knowing the truth, and wisdom is knowing when to shut up about it, which is kind of the whole aspect of it. It's like knowledge through the lens of love is wisdom, I think.
Yeah. Knowledge through the lens of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're all here as one. So to look at anyone or anything in an unloving way is to look at yourself in an unloving way, which is foolish. So.
Yeah. Don Miguel Ruiz talks about that in the 4 Agreements, under be impeccable with your word. So always do your best is one of the other agreements. It's like, always do your best and be impeccable with your word. Your word is your bond.
Don't take anything personally.
Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions.
Don't make assumptions.
Yeah, 4 simple agreements, but
pretty good ones.
Profound.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely profound ways to actually live, which is why I included those in the book as well, which is what we were going to be getting into. Antonella, awesome to see you here. We were part of the JMT together, the John Maxwell team, and Bobby Samples. We went to high school together as well. So Bobby, thanks for the birthday wishes. That is fantastic fun. And so I think we should probably dive in and maybe do a little pull.
Oh yeah, that was the whole intention. So let's do it.
That was the intention, but the conversation is fantastic. Maybe just like do a little, just flip to the medicine that you feel for the call tonight overall, and then I'll read the section that you flip to. You're such a good sport. I love it.
So what's this section?
Okay. Oh, the suicide entity. Interesting. Okay, so this is intense. We're gonna go right into it.
Okay.
Woo! Thank you, GeorD. Okay. The suicide entity is one such thought form that grips those who wake up to the corruption but feel trapped by it with nowhere to turn. It's why, according to Choices Psychotherapy, medical doctors, dentists, police officers, veterinarians, financial services, real estate agents, electricians, lawyers, farmers, and pharmacists are the jobs with the highest suicide rates. People serving in these positions had to put out a lot of time, energy, effort, attention, and money in order to get the position before finding out just how soul-destroying it is. And because so many feel the pressure to pay back all that went into getting the title, plus then what's required to rebuild our identity after it's taken away from us, it all just feels like too much. The suicide entity knows how to reinforce all of its limiting BS, and for far too long, it has taken too many of us out of circulation early. In 2018-19, when I was in limbo with getting this book done or knowing how to genuinely contribute in this world, it gripped me too. And when the uncertainty of how things currently are sinks in, the entity rears its head to see if it has caught me in a weak moment, where it can take advantage and call me closer to a threshold I will not cross. I comprehend the cost of crossing that line and want others to be aware of it too, especially because the legislation and bills the currently corrupted governmental bodies have been passing covertly during the cover of COVID-19 has made it easier than ever to be put down if we don't feel like carrying on, and many won't want to when they find out the ugly truth if they feel like no one cares or would miss them. We need to rebuild community now, so this is not the case, regardless of how close to that point we already are. It's completely about dropping those walls of the words that we use that we believe keep us safely separate from one another and talking about something different because you call it a law and I call it God. Or, you know,
Yeah, getting our terms even straight so that we can communicate is a chore on its own. But once that's there, then communication can happen. However, this reference to suicide, you're saying that the important thing is to communicate. I think that's the way out of this plight.
well, we have to get out of our head and into our heart again.
Yeah. Yeah. So the German medicine talks about suicide constellations. And unfortunately, that's level 3, and I still am studying that very much. But I'd like to talk to you about it more. However, I would kind of be filling in from rough holes in my mind. But as far as I understand, there's two kinds of situations which lead to a person's desire to commit suicide, and it's a constellation where there's particular traumas that have landed in the lobes of the mind, which are used to kind of determine our self values, and there's multiples of them. And once you go into them, you'll want to get out of the world. Then there's another situation where you have the release of a trauma, which then in resolution phase, you'll go into an epileptic crisis, which will stimulate a part of the brain which will make you want to commit suicide as well. And those are the two different types of suicide you have to watch for in the GNN. And they're very specific about what that is, and I will have to look it up to actually go into it in more detail. But yeah, I mean, the people who are taking on these jobs and doing all these kinds of things, they're the ones who are receiving traumas and multiple traumas of different kinds. And it's crazy how it affects us. Mm-hmm. The whole psychological manifestation of disease through traumas is all what level 3 is, and it breaks schizophrenia down into like six different types of schizophrenia to do with the different senses and which senses were affected during the time of the trauma and why. And yeah, it just shows how vulnerable and fragile we are to the subconscious programming that runs us.
Really. We can be, yeah.
Yeah. And once you wake up to it, though, then once you realize these connections, you can actually, subvert that. So, like you said, talking about this stuff and talking about your emotions and not bottling them up and not just thinking they're going to go somewhere else and be resolved if you don't deal with them is not really an answer. You have to go through all the emotional processes and figure them out and find a way to integrate them and make them part of you and love them and move forwards, or else you'll be living in that biological program that's trying to resolve your life by running your organs over and beyond, so you're sick. And this includes the brain.
With dis-ease, which is cellular disharmony within the cells of the body, the container of our soul. So realizing we are so much more than just what we see, and yet we must also look after what we see because it's the container that all of the energy that we are is contained within.
Our body just becomes the shadow of our mind. So we must clear our emotions so that we have a clear mind and a clear body.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheryl just said, I really appreciate this conversation. Reminds me of another one of my heroes. I'd like to introduce you to Psychology of Vision with Chuck. I have studied with him in several of his books. Chuck, yeah. Oh, he's got card decks. Well, I'd love that. I think you're going to dig him. Cool. I'll check that out after, Cheryl. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, so NGO is, or GNM is German New Medicine.
German New Medicine, or Germanic New Medicine, yeah.
Which you've been studying for 15-ish years?
Yeah, basically since I met my neighbors and they introduced me to it, and it made a whole lot of sense. That's when I started getting into this. And my neighbor that I met is the actual head of disseminating this information for the Americas.
Of course.
So the guy that invented this thing, she was good friends with, passed away about 4 years ago, which has led to a kind of a crazy scramble and everybody claiming they're the head of this thing. Now, it was really big in Spain because that's where he was. He fled from Germany because as he started to practice this, he got amazing results, but the medical industry said that he wasn't practicing to their standard, which was the case because he had a way better standard that he was now practicing to. But they tried to arrest him, and then, well, they took away his medical license. But then people will still try to contact him just to talk about their ailments because he could like clearly decipher how their particular traumas led to the ailments and how to get out of it. And it was such an invaluable way of looking at it that people sought him out. And then if he talked to any of them, which he did because he felt sorry and felt bad for them, these people were going to go take all these crazy medical procedures for simple things that you could just unsolve if you had dealt with your emotional sense of life. But there's like a whole crazy miasma around what's really important and what you should be taking care of, and in society that kind of directs you away from realizing that you really have to take care of what's important to you and what's actually happening in you. So anyways, he was they tried to arrest him because he had talked to these people and they considered that medical practice and he didn't have a license anymore. So he fled to Spain because they were just going to lock him up. And he continued his practice there because no one gave a crap. And he unveiled a lot of amazing things. And so there's a big Spanish contingent of people practicing in German medicine. And there's, like I said, Ilsadora and a few other people who are really carrying that on. His wife as well was a doctor of Mr. Hamer, GeorD Hamer, Dr. Hamer. His wife was also a doctor and works with Isadora to put the actual school website together so that you can go there, you can take all the courses and find out what the actual actions are that he suggests during sicknesses. And then you can take a exam so that you become a licensed practitioner now. That's brand new, as in like it's been 3 months since we finally got the thing up and running, and we're getting people going through this. Now,
amazing.
She's like taking a lot of people through these courses, but a lot of people just hack them and use them for whatever they want, which in some ways is great because it's an amazing central cipher for healing. However, there are specific things that you should be aware of that we give warning to, and if they're not heeded, you can do an incredible amount of damage as well. Like when you're undoing constellations, we call them, because every time you have a trauma that appears in your mind, a lesion in the lobe that is particularly designed for thinking in that realm. And so if you have many of them and you undo them too quickly, you can really harm yourself because it's in the undoing that you go through the healing process.
Yeah.
And the healing process is generally when people die. You have a conflict, you go into conflictivity, then you have a resolution, and then you go into the healing phase. And the healing phase is the hard one to get through.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating because my lawman and I often talk about the right use of will, which is a series by Cian Rohan that he recommended I read. So because I thought enough of him, I did it. And I'm grateful that I did because it gave us good context for conversation around a topic that is connected to what you're saying, but in different languaging, with basically saying there's 4 aspects to creation, which is the father principle, so God principle, and then you have the mother principle, which is earth, which is will, and then you have the heart, which is where matter and spirit meet to then magnify and magnetize the heart's desire into the world as the man infestation that we're seen to be.
So, but there's 4. So that there's the
spirit, heart, body,
Mother.
and
So there was, first you said there was God, and then there was mother, and then
God and will.
Well, will was mother.
Yeah.
Right?
Father, mother,
So
son,
creative God,
and man, body.
creative God, mother, will, and then you said heart.
The heart is, it's the heart child of the.
And the heart is the uniting of the material world and the spirit world, and then
And then it is a body of manifestation.
And then becomes the thing, the body.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a few things like ikara ki, kikara chi. That one. So that's the oldest Tibetan chant. It means I becomes ki and ki becomes chi, which is interest becomes focus, focus becomes attainment. So that's how all things come into the world. So like, I like music, so I practice music, then I can play music. I like you, I get to know you, then we have a friendship. And then it also kind of is interesting, like we were talking about before, because the male side of your brain is really the analytical side, and the female side of the brain is really the creative side. So kind of there, where you have God and mother, we have male and female, but it's kind of reversed because the creativity is in a different place in both, and the kind of logical steps are there. But then, you move together to create a piece of work. Say like I have an idea of what I want to do as an artist, but then I have to logically figure out how to make that. And then, so the idea and then the logical steps are two things. But then when I bring them together is a third thing, which is not either at the beginning or the end, but it is its own piece, and that's the attainment we talked about.
That's brilliant. So, when the reading itself was on the suicide entity, have you ever heard the suicide entity be called an entity, or is it just called suicide? And this is a question that then ties into any of the mental health disorders or diagnoses. And then also the association and the popularization of narcissism and empathy, empaths, like those two titles, the statuses, the term itself. And as you said, like the terms and definitions are key. So it's like when I was dealing with my summons for my person, which I was implied to be, and then had to fight to clear my name and clear essentially the credit card that was being charged with a debt that I didn't wish to actually look after, because I didn't feel like I had done anything wrong, and any man or woman that said that I had would need to actually take the stand under oath and make a superior claim to my claim that I'd done nothing wrong, and no one did. So they had to stay the charge, which meant they couldn't move forward with it. They couldn't move the case forward because it's a law case, because you put it in a briefcase because it's supposed to keep it brief, right? That's the case. Oh, yeah. But anyway, I digressed onto that track. But did you have something you wanted to interject?
Oh, well, you asked if you thought, if I've heard the suicide as an entity, as opposed to just a phenomena. Because that's what people do, they commit it. However, the entity that I think you're talking about is the same that I'm speaking of. It's a constellation in the mind of a particular array of traumas that somebody has gone through that causes this particular pattern of behavior to become, almost uncontrollably desired in certain people.
Yeah.
And that's why they do it. But, it's a wicked entity. And it's like very strange to think how this would be a biological outcome for particular species survival, because I relate all these kinds of psychological states and things that we go through as survival mechanisms. So the survival mechanism that makes you want to kill yourself is a very strange entity indeed. And I mean, the only thing that can really be doing is trying to secure some kind of, what do you call it, genetic termination of an abuse. Like, it's not there to obviously help the species, but, well, that's what I mean. It should be there to help the species, but in what way? The only way I could think of is because the species is going into an area where it shouldn't be, and it's like beyond good, so they're self-terminating. I mean, it's the only way that we could be helping the species, right?
Well, we were talking earlier
That's what I
about
think of it.
the weak generation, or the like strong people create weak people who create like the need for strength again. Like
Yes.
that cycle. I forget what I'd seen a meme of it, and then we were talking this morning.
Yeah, it's the concept that if I'm, like had a hard life, I know that making things better for my kids is really important. And so I'll, try to give them a lavish life. But then they'll grow up spoiled and be like, I don't care about anything. And then when it comes time for them to fend for themselves, they don't want to do it. And they become very, disillusioned and wind up in poverty and struggling, and having kids, and their kids see that and say, this is terrible. And then they have that bad upbringing, that which makes them work harder to give the next generation a better life, which then it kind of goes back and forth like that. And it's difficult to get away from those cycles. Like if you build an amazing, self-running, perfect place where no one has to do anything anymore, you may create a whole lot of idiots because no one does anything anymore. Mm-hmm. And doing is where we actually grow and become stronger, smarter, faster, better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's why children are not being taught cursive handwriting in schools. It's not because everything's going digital, which is binary, which is options, yes or no. Would you like to be in this box or that box? Those are your options. Choose one or the other.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Imagine we all of a sudden got electronic voice, so we never spoke again, and we all sounded exactly the same. That would really change the entire tone of the world.
Yeah.
Right now, with the cursive leaving, it's another form of communication, which is very personal. Mm-hmm. So, like people from generations before us would use writing, and their own handwriting and their own style would be a world, mm-hmm. just like our voices, or just like any personality really is. And how long can you take away those things until you're just left with a bland set of digital ones and zeros flying back and forth, and that's entire existence?
Well, that, from my perspective, is the 5D 2D split, which is what I came to the conclusion is what we're actually facing based on what my lawman and I have talked about so much. And basically the fact that 3D, like we're in our form until we're not. Like this is the character I'm playing, that's the character you're playing. And it's just like we are able to experience the 3D in this form until we surrender our free will to choose for ourselves for the sake of the group will, which is very much what has been being pushed on people for the sake of the greater good, and pushing people onto the lower level motivational needs instead of the higher ones.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference in how to create different kinds of communities. Obviously, kind of the group will is the most important thing, but to actually see the group will is more difficult than just listening to what a bunch of greedy advertisers want you to think is the group will. Because their group will includes everybody having a particular harness that leads back to their factory where we're paying them some kind of dividends. So like that's the issue, I think. Really, the group will is really important, but like what is really the intent behind the group will, and if it's not, to come to a greater understanding of the truth of reality that we're in, then we have to question whether it's worth keeping and whether it's worth sacrificing ourselves for. Because sacrificing ourselves is an important part of becoming ourselves. Because the reality is, I'm not going to be the same person I am without all my loved ones. So they are me, and I should really consider all those things me. So that group will is important, and to sacrifice myself for that is an okay thing. But if it's for the sake of like keeping up with the Joneses because the grass seed manufacturers say I need to, or whatever the gamut is at the time, then that's not really getting us anywhere, because then we're just wasting our creativity and wasting our good ability to create.
Yeah. Well, we become consumers compared to creators, reactors instead of creators, recognizing reactor and creator have the same letters, but it's a different order for where we're putting the energy of change and choice into the picture. So it's like the 2D reality is limited. It's just like, these are your options that I'm giving you because I'm the entity that's come into your decision-making your decision-making process. So I'm going to give you your options, and then you're going to make a choice that you think you had a choice in. But when mommy put out the clothes for the toddler to choose from, she put out two. The child thought that it had lots of options, but it didn't recognize all of the other choices that were still in the drawer that just hadn't been presented, which is the exact same thing with us. Which is why I mentioned about my summons last before a different segue. It's just like that was a choice that I could have just submitted to. Like I had the choice of paying $500 for it to go away to a charity of my choice and then have nothing resolved. For me to have an offense that I don't know who I offended because the woman acting as Her Majesty never showed up to speak for herself. And if she's the one's claiming that I offended her, then she damn well needs to be in that room, lest the dam start blocking me in and my energy and keeping me stagnant when I'm saying I just want to flow. I want to be in the flow of life. I want to make sure that things don't get stagnant and things are moving and we're, focused on something outside of what happened before now, because that's already done and gone. It's like our present reality reflects our previous level of awareness of our potential, not our potential itself at all. It's the law of the lid by John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. So it's like the lid is our self-image if we actually break it down. So it's like if you have a lid on a scale of 0 to 10, if your lid is at a 7, you're never going to let yourself go too far beyond 7 before you become or your self-image is like the elastic band effect that is going to pull you back into
confinement.
Yeah. Well, control, contracted states.
Right. You can't be better than this.
Contracted states.
So you'll sabotage yourself.
Isn't it obvious how contracted states of energy needing to then expand to compensate for the contraction and the contracting of ions? And then we see how the entities need us to contract our form or our substance to fit the forms, which is why under the mental health system, under that act, which I never got paid to play in, and it was very traumatizing, and there was so much that happened when my freedoms were suddenly taken away and I was locked up in a building that was supposed to be safe, but like bad things happened in those places. Nothing happened to me, but like the pattern is very energetically present. It's pervasive. And especially if you're in a heightened state of awareness and then you get sent to a place where all of these entities are, which takes us back to the suicide entity. We have to see how we are being fed off of energetically.
Yeah, the system's a difficult one to deal with. I mean, if the German medicine is correct and that all the sicknesses and stuff that we're talking about mostly come from psychological traumas.
Yeah.
I'm sure toxicity has a part of it. Poisoning is real. We acknowledge that. But most of the elements that we go through are heavily to do with being traumatized. And if you talk to anybody who's had any kind of illness, most of the trauma comes from diagnoses.
Yes.
And from treatment.
I don't doubt it at all.
Right. So, I mean, that's just like such a counterproductive system if that's the case. And what the hell are we doing? And then, it's just a mess if you start to try to hold doctors liable for.
You can't. You can't hold a doctor liable. They weren't born that way. It's a man acting as a doctor. A man practicing doctoring.
Yeah.
Practicing medicine.
Yeah, and they're just doing what the pharmaceutical companies have deemed to be the correct course of action for whatever these epidemiology courses they figure. So it's terrible.
Well, this is why I keep on saying the same thing I've said for the last year since I figured it out, because I did it in the case that has now got stayed because it would be unconscionable for the men and women acting on behalf of the corpse to move forward with fraudulent activity, given I had already exposed the fact that it was fraud and that they were liable in their private capacity. They moved my case forward from October 31st to be stayed on September 21st instead with the rest of the cases that were from that day. But the reason that I'd mentioned it in the first place is I had the opportunity to choose to pay $500 to have it go away, seemingly, except for I would have been marked anyway on my record.
Yeah, I'm sure they've definitely
like they can't take it all out. Like, I know it's a diversionary program, and like and in 2009, after I graduated from university, I worked for St. Leonard's Community Services in London. So I was actually a case manager for some young ones that had like got caught with a gram of marijuana on them, and then were now being in this program that they have to come to programming and make sure that they're making responsible choices. They have to create an art project, was something that I had to assign some of them. They had to do some volunteer work or donation. So it's just like,
that sounded pretty good.
It does sound pretty good. But then like the one that is sitting in the chair is just like, I'm going to go home and smoke more than you got caught with. I'm just not going to get caught. And then it's just like, but the reality is I felt so perplexed because I felt like a total hypocrite, because I knew that I was going to I was going to go smoke myself, and they were just there for having got caught doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just so crazy that we have held ourselves to these impossible standards in some ways. And then also in the process of having those higher standards, then it's like, oh, if the shelf is too high, I'm just not trying. And then it's just like you give up before you even try, which is why like your potential is reflected by what you choose to do now, because this is what we have the choice to control. Well, not control, but to be in charge of. Because like whenever we're trying to control, we're trying to contract, which is trying to shrink the expansion of one that is out of the box. Which, when you say about the trauma of diagnosis in itself, I remember when I was in that place and I was locked up, and I was just like, why am I here? Like, what grounds do you have to even keep me here? And then I'm told it's a psychotic episode or psychosis. Well, what is psychosis? But if you read, there's a video I'll share when I post this as well on YouTube, that I do mention in the book as well, because it stands out. It's a video on mass psychosis, but it's the caricature version of it, which, if you think about the caricatures, just as a side point, real and nonfiction are said to be synonymous but are not the same. So if that is the case, that nonfiction is what was real until then it was made to be the fiction that was not, which makes it still the fiction because the universe doesn't differentiate negatives within our diction. So if we are saying nonfiction, the universe is only hearing fiction. So it's just going to give us more of that which is not real. And that's why I mentioned it in relation to the caricatures with this video on mass psychosis. I'd highly recommend, because when you are in court, you can't have a real picture taken. Why is that? You can only have the caricatures drawn of you, because then it is a reflection of it being nonfiction instead of what is real. That's why when you go to court, you can only be drawn.
So that's why.
I believe that makes complete sense to me.
I'm sure they have probably espouse a different reason for it, but your rights and but yeah, like how is it any different? Anyways, it always been a strange thing to me too. Like a drawing pad in there.
This is why, though, because it's not real. So to actually.
So when you say it's not real, and when you say when they're making a fiction.
Yeah.
Sorry to unravel this, but I just don't quite understand the language. So when you're a legal fiction is what you're talking about, and what does that exactly mean? Like,
the legal fiction is the conversion of a man into a person.
Okay, so man and person are very different things. A man is who I actually am, and a person is like a legal or somehow a representative avatar of me.
So your person is the equivalent of the Facebook account. Okay. And gotcha. That Facebook account that I have, which is how I'm able to stream live right now, is what my presence there is based on.
Okay.
That is not me. That is just capturing what I choose to share there. So does that, like, that is implied to be me, but it is not me. But it will be confused with
Yeah.
me until I specify and make a claim that it's not, and that somebody would have to actually make a superior claim in order to say that my claim was not true. Because that's how we defame someone's name, by making a claim that defames them.
Right.
And then they can either make a counterclaim that clears up their name, or they feel the victim. And that's what so many people do. It's like the suicide entity then comes in, because it's like, oh, you failed now, you're always a failure. And then you get into that negative downward spiral
I
talk
see.
that takes you all the way to the bottom of the emotional high rise of awareness.
Yeah, if you don't jump over the first few hurdles of trauma that they throw at you, you will definitely get thrown under the tires.
Yeah.
And get run over by the system.
Yeah.
So that's all kind of, you think, makes sense that this would be the kind of game that they're playing to move things forward in their court, I guess.
No, literally.
Yeah.
Literally. But then even to take it, we were talking suicide entity itself. It's just like when we start recognizing that an entity is a thought form that's accrued energy. So if an entity is a thought form that is accrued energy, and there is an entity with everything, so as soon as we're connecting to the thing, we're actually connecting to the gestalt around the whole thing, which means that everyone that is connecting through that thing in this matrix is then connected.
Okay, I'm lost. Sorry. So you're saying that when you say it's accrued energy, you mean it's energy that's been gathered?
Yes.
Through these traumas.
Yes. Well, it's through the collective devotion of energy. To
devotion of energy.
So to anyone who has tuned into the emotional state of that experience of devotion, which then we worship, because then we go back there, and those memories take us into the not now, compared to in the now where our power is. So the entities are feeding off of our energy, which is our presence.
And these entities are?
Well, the entities of Facebook, for instance, the entities of the courts, the entities of suicide, the entities of marijuana, the entities of a book fetish, right? Like whatever your thing is, whatever. So it's
And so when you're saying entities, you're talking about behavioral patterns?
Gestalts, yeah.
Gestalts, okay. I'm not so good with English as you are. So gestalt is a pattern
of Gestalt is a name. That was interesting. Yeah. No. The gestalt around like it's like the problems right here. This isn't, and I'm not that, yeah. So there's all the things that I want to say around, like you saying, like you're not as good at English, and it's just like,
I just don't know the words that, I'm not sure of what the word definitions that you're using. So when you say gestalt, you're talking about a pattern of thought. Yeah. You're talking about a kind of pattern of consciousness.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, the Gestalt, it was explained to me by a teacher that actually was mentoring me for the communications and problem solving based programming called the Peacemakers program, ironically enough, was what I was teaching in 2009, which was teaching children like grades 3, 4s, 5, 6s, how to mediate conflicts on the schoolyard. So then they'd wear their peacemakers vest and they'd go out there and they'd see children in conflict, and then they'd go out and then they'd mediate them, and they'd get down to their level and make the eye contact and use FELOR. So FELOR was an acronym. It just is coming back at this moment. But anyway, so
I like this.
So Anne was my mentor when I started this position, and she had been doing this and lots of other conflict resolution training programs for like decades. And so she actually was retiring and becoming a Gestalt therapist at the time, which is where I became familiar with the term Gestalt. And then my lawman lent me a book called Joyriding the Universe, which I started out this year reading. And there's a chapter on there, which was why I started reading it live daily for a while in January, on the Gestalt of Santa Claus, which I'll bust out this year again, because that sounds like it would be fun.
So it's like, it sounds like a mythos that was being created to induce a pattern of thought that we probably have natural tendency for one reason or another.
Brilliant. Yes. Mythos, myth. When you say mythos, it sounds different from a myth. So somebody that's looking for myth and hears mythos thinks you're talking about something different. And this is just the breaking down of semantics and definitions, and the fact that if we're talking about the same thing, it's just I'm expecting him to say myth and he says mythos, which sounds better and it totally fit and it was perfect. It's just kind of using those teachable moments that only show up in the now, which is what I had the benefit of learning from those who were established down the way, to be able to say, just be where you are, present. Just flow with the moment. Because, and I even heard this just in the last week, that if you show up unscripted, unrecorded, well, not unrecorded, because obviously we're recording this, but if we actually are willing to show up in the moment, to be fully where we are, we then allow an entity outside of us to come into the dynamic, which is the power of the mastermind.
Interesting.
So it's just like the power of two then accrues and creates interest of energy with a third mind, where our energy collectively combining then creates an entity, which is the growing, the idea that we are putting our energy into together, and then others do as well.
A collective consciousness of sorts.
Exactly. That's what gestalts are. And when we talk about being the players on the field, it's the field of consciousness.
Makes sense.
So we have to know our language. We have to know our terms, definitions, and then be able to lift the lid on the self-image. Because I don't think I finished that chart that I started mentioning a long time ago. But like 0 to 10, if you're a 7, like I said before, and then you actually shift and focus on just going to an 8 or a 9. Like that's a more reasonable lift of the lid. But you're making a better investment of your time, energy, effort, attention, money by focusing on just getting a little bit better. And like one change a day or one task accomplished or goal hit per day is 365 at the end of the year.
Like, instead of like waiting until New Year's where you're going to stop all your bad behavior and you're going to be perfect from that moment
right
on. It never works.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Just every day, if you can do something better, then do it.
Yeah. Which is what hopefully this experience has been for someone who has been listening as well. I know Frozen, Cheryl, you're saying it's frozen, but I actually love that you brought in that word itself, because the movie Frozen, I feel, is very symbolically significant for the times that we're living in, actually. Because I feel like with all of the trauma and hurt and pain and everything everybody's been going through for so long, it's like I feel like, because I say it in the epilogue of my book, actually, like I built up heart walls with everything that I've been through in the last few years. It's been intense, and basically in that process of like building up these walls, I realized like I become like Queen Elsa. It's just like, not fully, but like there was a part of me that like,
you're unreachable in your castle then?
I was. No, I'm reached now. I appreciate that. But like the heart walls built up and we've become frozen in our emotions, which is when we suppress, repress, compress, depress, deny, reject, or try to hide or pretend that emotions don't exist, which is when then we get hit with their momentums in a future moment. Because we left part of ourselves, which are the personalities or personas or masks, in the past. And then when we dropped that and left that there, in the next now moment where that energy shows up, it's just like the other energy, because like attracts like, is like, oh, great, I can be resolved too. And then it suddenly shows up in the now with the momentums of all of the not now moments that are stuck in a not now moment in the now there, but it's a memory for us now where we are, because we're not there anymore.
I think I got it.
You're a good sport.
But yeah, it sounds like you're talking about tracks. and how we, if we don't deal with the behavior or the trauma that kind of hit us, then it's just locked up in the subconscious, waiting for the stimulus to bring it to life again, and then all of a sudden you're in the same boat when you were traumatized. Trauma didn't actually get resolved, so it still just lingers. You oppress it, just throw it away, you pretend like it didn't happen, but it's just, and that'll eventually work, and you won't feel the actual discomfort of the trauma eating away at you. But as soon as like something comes that stimulates it, that reminds you of the moment that you got traumatized, boom, you're like laid out.
So that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
That's very common. And like we've had the conversation and I've shared, I believe that the mental health system itself, obviously from my experience, I believe it's corrupted, and I believe that it became popularized when people became more profitable to convert into patients, and dependence on a system that turns profits with the pH into ones that the corpse can profit off of the energy force of those who then have to feed off of the system and then feel trapped in that vicious cycle of needing the drugs, but then needing to get better and needing the emotional support to do it, but not knowing where to get that and not having the coverage, and then all of the lack and limitation that keeps us focused from belonging into the social unit or structure where we can have comfort and love and all of the things that we desire for ourselves, and then like safety and survival compared to respect and self-actualization that allow us to have those things too.
They're all necessary to build that triangle. If you don't have one of them, it's hard.
You can't skip steps.
No, you can't skip steps.
And respect.
And yeah, it's very difficult that people go to a hospital and they're like, really, they're saying, I have emotional problems. And then the doctors are going, well, take lots of drugs, which will probably reduce your chance of actually dealing with the problems.
Yeah. Well, and all the music is about being numb as well.
Yeah.
So the intention for this evening, and it was really just to give an opportunity to get together, and I appreciate you for being willing to do this with me on late notice. Well, your contributions are brilliant, and so to anyone that's not familiar with GeorD Lishman, you will be seeing a lot more of him.
Hey, is that Jim?
Yes, yes. Jim Kerr has the bubble bus with Thundra. I don't know if we're still frozen or not, but what is not frozen is the recording on Zoom that we'll be ripping and then posting to YouTube. So
can I do one more?
Oh, sure. Yeah, please. Ding, ding, ding. Oh, look at this. This is exciting. All right. Final 9:09.
9:09
is what time it is, yeah.
So it's page 27.
Page 27. Oh, the ones who are neutral and do their part to stay that way as best as they can. Oh, how they get manipulated most by the ones who choose us as their host. Only the darkness can take us over because we already are the light we are. The darkness makes us fear our own power, and the true ones await guidance from the lady they trust to know best. But when she is scared, she can only add vice. Throughout the years, the keepers of the sky have been the Khaleesi's that tried to do it alone and drove themselves mad, as I seemed to be the day after this was written. What she needs are the ones who will stand true and tell her what she needs to hear, not just what she wants to hear, because in her purity of heart, she will think that she knows best. The world order requires a reworking, and those in power cannot afford it. They have put all their chips on the dark side without realizing it, choosing the black suits instead of the red. But no, they knew better when they went against their nature, yet their inner sense did not stop trying to get through to them. That is our saving grace. The red ones are the wisdom keepers, who aspire to be so good they have set an impossible standards for themselves, and this is what must fall. The impossible ideal of perfectionism now needs to be released. Life is perfectly imperfect. It is time for us to realize that it is only with real eyes that we can trust what is true in our heart of hearts. And that is where the earth comes in. So
That's deep.
that was what I wrote on the plane from Arizona to DC before I then flew back to Toronto, and the next day called the police to report the system was corrupt and they were in on it, and that I was here to help bring peace and take me to your leaders. Didn't go well. Learned a lot. Wouldn't make that call again. Grateful that I did though, when I did.
Because it's hard to make those extrications without having the specifics. But they all knew it's true, however they locked you up for it. So.
I did get locked up, and I got to experience a lot of patterns. And but yeah, the red ones.
They gave you a free education.
I got a very good education quickly. But the red ones in there are the wisdom keepers, like the earth keepers.
So describe what you mean by the red ones.
The red ones were the pure-hearted ones, because
what determined them as being red, and where was this, and who are they?
That was what we just read.
Yes, I know. But what are the red ones? Is this like
the red ones are the pure-hearted,
energetically red? And these are people that you saw in the institution? Or?
No, I literally wrote that story without any errors. It just like flowed.
Right. So
I changed it.
This is like seemed like more like a poem than
it was.
Completely makes like sense, but you can unpack it. So like that's the thing, is that was really deep. Like it was very dense and like a lot of different possible meanings, and I love that kind of writing where you can see a lot of different possible meanings to it, and so it just makes you think about them all.
Yeah. Well, at that time, the fight between the fearful and faithful had gotten really strong, and I was literally seeing the black and white outside of myself, and then seeing the gray ones, which is where we picked off the story. And the gray ones are what I said were most easily manipulated by the dark side, because ultimately the dark have the most to lose by that free space the gray are, because they're tainted with the darkness but also the light, and so they have to choose which wolf will win in the fight. It's
like those who are good, definitely setting good, aren't going to change, and those who are evil are definitely setting evil, aren't going to. But those who are kind of on the fence are the gray ones, and that's who the good and evil are fighting for.
Yeah,
that's the way you described it. That made a lot of sense to me, because I think that is the case. And that we do need to shine bright so that the gray ones can say, hey, I want to be illuminated like that.
Yes. Yeah. And then actually Bishop Larry Gators, a couple of years ago, when I did an interview with him on the spiritual roots of sickness and disease, was what our interview was on. So basically talking about mental disease and then the psychological, spiritual roots of it from his perspective. Which was really interesting. But in the process of talking to him, he mentioned the word illumination, and actually shared how it was actually meant to be illumination. So illumination. The illumination and the illumination being concepts that were derived from the which is the Elohim. And the El of the angels and all of that.
Back to the Sumerian texts again.
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in all of that.
Illumination,
yeah.
The illness coming from that as well, because that's what often you get when you get illuminated as well.
An illness from illumination?
Well, this is the thing that I'm talking about, the resolution cycle. So when you're in conflict, and that's one of the things that the German medicine really points out, which is counterintuitive, is that when you're in conflict, you're actually intact as far as your, what do you call that again, your immune system. You're not compromisable, because your organs are there to try to take care of your life's purpose. They are functioning fully well, and your immune system's intact, protecting them, making sure nothing happens. But once you resolve your problem, that's when bacteria, microbes, and fungus will set in to fix the organ that's been stressed.
Right.
So when you become illuminated as to how to resolve the problems that are facing your life, then you'll get illness.
Right. Illumination leads to illness, which is because if we're illuminated, then so this kind of ties.
But the illness is like part of the healing process. The reality is that you were already ill because you were suffering in a trauma and a conflict mental state. But it doesn't feel bad because you feel good. It's like when you take a poison, such as alcohol or a drug, it makes you feel great for however many hours until your body says, okay, we've processed enough of this.
Now it needs to leave.
Now we need to basically fix your organs, and that's going to feel like crap.
Yeah.
You're going to get inflammation. You're going to get all these heating and like, what do you call it, runny noses and all these kinds of things will happen during that phase because your body's fixing it, because you've been running your organs so hard. But doing that gave you a ton of energy to your brain and made you feel great.
Yeah. You have such a fantastic mind. Thank you.
So do you. It's
Thank
my pleasure.
you. Yeah, you as well. There's so much to go into with all of this conversation. So
it's a long, big conversation about everybody, for sure.
Definitely will look forward to coming on again. I want to be respectful of the fact that you didn't specifically know what you were signing up for when it was like, I could either go home and do it there, or I can stay here and we do it together. So this is what happened. And so pretty excited.
That was a great conversation.
Yeah, it truly was. And yeah, I do believe truly that the German New Medicine can really benefit people to be aware of with what you're sharing, and you have shared with me in the last month. It's just like
an amazing tool to help understand why we're going through what we go through. So a lot of people, modern medicine just still says, well, you've had some kind of mutation for random reasons that you have no control over, and this is why your body's doing this. And it's just as much of a lie as, you're completely bound by your genetics, because we now know you can change what genes are turned on and off, which will affect your kids. You can, like a lot of the modern medicine myths are getting dispelled. And one of them is that we don't know where diseases come from, and that illnesses are just random viruses that can kind of jump in your body or somehow flare up for whatever reason. They're not. They're all controlled and mitigated by our psyche. And it can actually be visibly seen on a CAT scan. And that's what, we're going to wake up to. And it's going to be a very interesting thing, because we're going to be given the reins to our own health and realize that we've been run off the cliff by, industries that profit from selling this stupid crap that don't work. So
we're going to be debunking the CIA Gateway Process report, because
I don't know what that is, but that sounds
he's
like fun.
Unfamiliar with it so far, but the perspectives that you'll bring into it are going to blow your mind, as you can see. So
well, stay tuned.
Stay tuned, indeed. I love it. I just want to say, I want to read this because it seemed appropriate, because I flipped to it, and
cool.
So we're going to end. We're going to end tonight. 108. You're awesome. Thank you. Okay. No one has it all together or fully figured out, even if they do a great job pretending they do. And I feel like our youth especially need to be let in on that secret. Secrets are destructive to the soul because they require sacrificing the truth for the sake of keeping a lie quiet. And those willing to speak out often get called stitches that need stitches and sometimes wind up in ditches. But if not now, then when will be a better time to do what has not yet been done, which is to bring the sacred back in place of the secrets so many have compromised their souls to uphold. So that is a reflection of Omerta, which I've mentioned a few times now, because I just became aware that it's the code that I was tuning into at the time when the fearful and the faithful went on. The fight was so big that I tuned into the energetic pattern of Omerta, where you're not to get authorities involved. You settle it man to man, woman to woman. You don't get entities involved. You deal with it. That's Omerta. But like Italian mob code, and not just limited to Italy. But the point is that at the point when I went over the edge, quote unquote, it was like I was tuned into that pattern, and it was terrifying and exhilarating. And it was just like this whole spectrum of, holy crap, I didn't understand what was going on, what I was tuning into. And it's just like, it was too much for me. And I didn't have a safe space to go. Like, nobody could handle me. I've always been told I'm too much. And then it's just like, I had an ex, lover that I called, and like he doesn't do crazy, but like that night he like talked to me for an hour in the car when like there like people were wearing white and black and like walking by, and like I'm literally like the fight is like big, and like I was the stories and the myths and the legends that were being created in that experience was just like holy next level. I'd never experienced a state of paranoia before, but like I was feeling myself to be more important than what I was seemingly, or where I had the sense of it going was extreme, like in the sense of like fast, quick. Like it's just like it's kind of like even my approach to this whole con video game to an extent. It's just like I read all, like not all the stuff, but like I was reading a lot of alternative information that made me think that, you know, the stock markets were going to collapse like 2 years ago, and like the food prep, like
Yeah, there's a lot of fear thrown at us.
right.
It was crazy. People were having fear gasms everywhere.
Yeah, but the insanity is it's just like we've collectively been pushed into a state that I pushed myself into. And like the DMT ceremonies that like I'd done 6 months before needed time to energy or to integrate. And I didn't have the community to actually support me at that time through it. And it's just like that's why Peaceful Inner Warriors United is such a powerful movement. And I truly believe that, not because I've created the concept for it. I truly believe that we need to be able to be supported by people that get it, that can hold sacred space without having the power element come into play, where then we start to look at the one that's holding the space as if they're doing something when we're the ones that are doing the fucking work. Like there is no like I show up and you heal me. It's just like,
but you know, through reflection you can find some, you know, insight. I love that image of a person who's talking to a therapist and they've got all this scrambly wool in their head, and the therapist is just kind of rolling with the ball. Because separating our thoughts and separating what we think and trying to come to a real understanding of what we're going through is not an easy task. It all gets so jumbled together. Some clear thinking can really be a very healing thing. That's why I like to like play my little chess game every once in a while, where it's all about just clear thinking about how things move, because it's really the only way to unravel these kinds of things that have happened. And it is unravelable. That's what the German medicine tells us too, is that there is like actual reasons and rhymes why you go into a psychotic break, or why you think you get into paranoia, or why it's stresses in particular lobes, and they can be measured with scientific equipment. You need to really bring out this technology so we have it.
Yes. Well, I thought, like, when I was going through that, it was just like, I can't go into the basement and deal with the depression that comes with not being further ahead and all of the pressures and everything. And I had a lot of growing to do. And so, like, that process really forced me into that. I lost my train of thought. Were you good?
Well, we're talking about technologies to help us actually fix this.
Oh, that was the point. I thought they would do some brain tests.
They would
like chemical tests. I thought that there would be like brain scans. I thought that there would be some kind of like real science behind all of it. And
the amount of actual science that goes on in the medical industry, and the amount of like kind of like grandfathered in thinking that just kind of gets carried over so that we can keep selling the same damn crap is actually very astounding. Scary.
Yeah. Well, even before COVID, the doctors' misdiagnosis was said to be the third leading cause of death in America, because doctors are prescribing the wrong medications, they're misdiagnosing, they're mistreating, they're not familiar, they're not in you, they don't know what you're feeling, they don't know why you're feeling what you're feeling.
And like the doctors don't have an easy go at it by any means. They're just told how to, you know, see patients through what do you call it, a pharmaceutical lens. And the reality is, we know most of the work is done by the placebo effect. So good doctors come and look at you and say, you're going to be fine. You're going to get better. You know, drink some liquids, go home, rest. Those are the best doctors. The worst ones are like, oh, so what you said you had that symptom? Oh, wow, that's symptom.
Yeah.
That's this much money I get if I say this drug for
Yeah.
that symptom. So you really need to take it.
Yeah, prescribed.
Disgusting.
Let me write you a script that you're to follow, and then you're the one that has to sit with the consequences when it doesn't go the way that it's supposed to, or when you get the consequences of the consequences of the consequences of the consequences.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Like karma.
Yeah, you list, a list of drugs this long to deal with all the side effects of the side effects of the side effects.
Exactly. It's absolute insanity.
But making the money.
The gray matter is actually the gray matter of the brain is, in retrospect, of my experience, and then just like the stories, and then kind of putting the myth into perspective from a different level where I'm not so close to it or in the trauma, which is why I'd mentioned Anne in the first place, my mentor, about Gestalt, it being like a problem that's like right here. So it's just like, if it's going to go around the head, it doesn't take very long to get there. But it's like, if when it shows back up in my reality, instead of getting down and dirty and playing in the mud with it, I just say, okay, I'm going to touch it and go. And I'm going to just say, okay, carry on your way. It then will go around again, but it takes a bit more time because it's further out. And then every time I touch it and go instead, it's like I move it further out.
That's interesting. The German medicine talks about the same kind of concept, whereas if you have a trauma, the amount of, like, if you have trauma when you're 5, when you're 10, it'll come back and say, hey, I'm here again. And then if you have it, you don't resolve it then, it'll come back when you're 15, but it'll be even stronger when you're 20. The doubling cycles, it really gets like a punch.
That simulacrum theory by Archaics, that I shared a video on the Telegram group. If you're not involved, then definitely do jump in. Peaceful Inner Warriors United Assembly on Telegram. But in there, Archaics was talking about the ripple effect theory in an interview with Chris Rice with Rice TVX on YouTube. You can check out part 2 of a video that Chris did an interview with Archaics talking about predictions. And he was talking about the ripple effect, which is essentially, if you actually track any events, you track the day, and then you actually track backwards and forwards in equal measure. And then you find overlapping parallels.
When you talk about events, you mean like, what kind of events are we talking about? Events that strike you.
I can't think of the specific example, but he basically had shared the example of like, I can't even give you the example. I just know that the ripple effect is relevant to this. It's just like, I don't have all the pieces yet. It's just pulling the pieces together as we're
Sounds
rifting.
Similar. Interesting.
Yeah.
We'll have to look at it.
Yes, we will. And so, unless there is anything else that you would like to do on this evening's first episode with GeorD Lishman and Laura J.
Hi. Yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you for having me. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Yes, we will definitely do that. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. And yeah, thank you for being you.
Thank you too.
Yeah.
Okay. And thank all of you.
Thank you.
Anybody there? Hello.
Anybody alive out there? Thank you. All right. Have a fantastic night, everyone. And yeah, we're going to on Monday, actually, the 17th of October, coming back for taking Just Say No to the Next Level Lawfully. So we're going to talk about notices. We're going to talk about standing in status. We're going to talk about why I believe that my case got staged with everyone else's, that some had paid and others just, were fighting their own way, but ultimately it got moved, and there's reason for that. So I think that we should be gathering those of us who are doing challenging things by actually standing for ourselves, because it's not easy and it comes with a high cost, and we've all been paying a high cost for a long time, but not all is yet lost, because we have the opportunity to turn the ship around by calling for personal liability, accountability, and responsibility for everyone to recognize that energy works in patterns. And so we really have to realize where what patterns we're plugging into, which is why I brought in we're talking about gestalts. And you had mentioned the word miasma, which I think is connected to a gestalt or a paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, a miasma is like a fog that's created around mythical dark creatures to smell bad and to blind you and to poison you. But, that's what I kind of figure some of that. I can't remember what we were referring to. I thought it was medical industry myths about the way things are. They have to be.
So brilliant. Amazing. Yes. I got myself distracted because there's a humanly part of me that just wants to say, okay, we're going to go. But that was, brilliant. I'm totally sidetracked. And
okay. Yeah, there's lots more to talk about.
There is lots more to talk about. Next time we will come back on. I was sharing announcements. So Monday, you've got that coming up. On the 31st of October as well, I'm going to host a call for reviewing reviews. If anyone wants to submit your review, I'd appreciate that, of the book, Fully Committed, The Sacred Sojourn of Now. So please, if you haven't already got your copy, you can reach out to me and I'd be glad to hook you up for $25 or $5 for $100 plus shipping, unless we can connect and then get it into your hands. And as a final, letting this evening pass on my 35th birthday.
35.
Woo-hoo-hoo. So I'm going to read you the quote by Jack Kerouac. You're familiar with this one?
I don't think I am.
Here's to the crazy ones.
Okay.
The misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Amen.
All men must stand united. Indeed. So yes. And women, absolutely, we must. Thank you. Peace.